All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. And regular listeners will know that I often chuckle when I say that because I'm often imitated saying those words, or dare I say, mocked. Well, they say that imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So I'll go with that. My name is Billy Dees, and we are primarily a commentary and an interview podcast. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on down the line. I do want to send out a shout out to our friends over at Good Pods. And also, I want to shout out to anyone from Twitter Spaces. And if you're not familiar with that, that's another subject for another day. But it basically has a lot of the elements of Clubhouse if you followed that. And I've made some interesting professional connections on Twitter Spaces. And I want to shout out to anyone who may be coming in here and checking out the program on the basis of some of those spaces. How's that sound? What we are going to be talking today about is infusing politics in your business model, in your nonprofit, or in your marketing plan of any kind a good idea. And if this is as far as you're going to listen to the podcast and you want an answer, want to know what my opinion is, the answer is no. No, not unless you are a politician. And we're going to kind of break this down. It's interesting to me. One of the reasons why I have this reaction is kind of like a cliche, right? You were always told, don't, at the Thanksgiving dinner table, don't talk about politics and don't talk about religion. And it was kind of like a humorous cliche. This was something that oh, it's going to get into talking about this, that, and the other thing. So you don't do it, right? And for me, anyway, I'm not a young person anymore, I guess. Not 20, I should say. And I remember back in the 1980s when President Reagan was the president, and a lot of people, I mean, you heard the word conservative and you heard the word liberal, but by and large, you could talk about what the president was doing without getting into those ideologies. Okay. And that has changed over the last 10 or 15 years. I would say that it's, in my opinion, and the show is my opinion. And by the way, I am not a political ideologue. If you're new to the program here, I'm not clearly a conservative. I'm not clearly a liberal. As a matter of fact, I don't even like being defined as a moderate because I don't like being on the scale. There's way too much of that. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. This idea now that you are a conservative, you're a liberal, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, it's beyond what was referred to in the 1980s and even the 1990s. It's beyond that now. It's not just a general philosophy that you apply to things. They have become, these ideologies have become cults. And if you feel that that's a strong word, consider this. When you say you're not for me, you're against me. These people outside of our circle, those people over there, they're out to destroy our way of life. They're wrong. Everything they say is wrong. Everything that they believe in is designed to take away our way of life. That's the earmark of a cult. Okay. And I've had numerous discussions about this. I've checked some of the data on this, and it varies. Okay. There are some people who tell me that a lot of this radical political ideology stuff is fueled mostly online. And that may or may not be true. I don't know. But I can tell you, I've been confronted with it in the real world. I absolutely I have. I have been accosted a number of different times. And that really doesn't bother me. But I'll tell you what does bother me is there's probably 24 people that, let's say, over the past 5 or 10 years, I didn't necessarily line up with politically, but they were friends and acquaintances that I could sit down and have a conversation. And sometimes they would move the needle on me. And that's kind of where I come from with this program. I don't necessarily have an agenda. I'm not one of these people that's going to hype up conservatism or, being a liberal or anything like that. My main thing, my style of this program is to sometimes go up to a place that isn't discussed with those sides, and maybe go a direction with a certain topic that you may not expect. That's kind of my shtick, so to speak. And that's what I enjoyed listening to when I had conversations with these friends of mine. They sometimes would move the needle on me. I would say, yeah, you know what? That's interesting. And I would revisit these topics myself, and maybe I would do more research along those angles. But I don't have those conversations with those people anymore because they're impossible to talk to. They're very disappointing. Everything is a whataboutism. As soon as something comes out of my mouth, what about this? What about that? What about your side? Blah, blah. And there's no talking to them, and they play gotcha on terminology. They'll slice and dice what certain words and phrases mean, and say, "Oh, that's what you said. That's what you said," and you have to go down this whole thing and backtrack and restructure your comment. And this serves no purpose. I mean, there is no intellectual value in that conversation whatsoever. It is an absolute waste of time. And the reason that this topic came up today is about a week or so ago, I was involved in a conversation, and I wasn't one of the primary speakers in this conversation. So I didn't want to make a big commentary because I just felt like it wasn't my place. But I was actually surprised. When we were talking of what the topic of conversation was should you put politics into your marketing plan? And this may be in regard to a nonprofit. It may be in regard to a business. And, my pat answer is always no. And I was surprised some people didn't agree with me on this. First of all, they said that there's plenty of data that politics makes an impact on donors. Now, this, of course, is in regard to a nonprofit or some sort of an organization, some community organization. And it's very wise to, in this day and age, people pay close attention to your political affiliations and the causes that you are involved in. And they stated over and over again, the data is there that you should pay attention to the political leanings of your donors, that this does pay off. And the second argument that they made was that in this day and age, which is a phrase that they've often used, that they have an obligation to change society. And some of the topics they threw out there were diversity, global warming, and some of these other things. Okay. There's so much wrong with those points, so much more nuance to those things that I'm not sure where I should start. Okay. But let me try to go through this. Let me try to go through this. First of all, faith, hope, and charity don't have ownership or a political party or a political ideology does not have ownership over doing the right thing. Okay. So when you mention diversity, when you mention homelessness, when you mention hunger, when you mention all of these things that very much need our attention in our community, these things don't belong to any political party. Doing the right thing, you can champion these things without having a political affiliation. And what I really don't like when political affiliations start to creep into good causes is because political movements will often take something that is very benign, very innocuous, and something like homelessness. Who would possibly not want to do something for the homeless, right? So they take this moral high ground and they use the same tactics that politicians will with various bills that are going through Congress. The lead cause of that bill, the lead concern, is something that everybody agrees with, like helping homelessness, right? But they sneak in a half a dozen other things under that headline, and that bill goes through. And a lot of that money, a lot of that effort goes into other places besides homelessness. Okay. And what these political movements often do is they will take something like that and do exactly the same thing in the public forum. Is they will take the moral high ground on something like homelessness and sneak in other things that fit into their political agenda. And if you're against any of those things, then you are pro-homelessness. That's the tactic that happens there. Okay. And it has done a lot of harm to our society. Speaking of diversity, in the last couple of years, I've been in a couple of networking groups where diversity is part of that discussion. And I've also been on one committee whose dedicated purpose was talking about diversity and talking about some of the problems that various people have because of culture, race, or other things. And even during the crazy election that we had between Trump and Joe Biden, even during those heightened news cycles, nobody mentioned who they were voting for. Nobody talked about it, whether they were a conservative or a liberal or whatever, pro-Trump, against Trump, never Trump, whatever. These things never came up in those discussions. And I was very happy about that because it doesn't belong there. Doing the right thing does not need to be involved in a political movement. Political discussions should happen in political forums. The other thing that I really don't particularly like about this conversation is that I don't argue the point that there's a lot of data. That's what we hear now. There's a lot of data that indicates that tracking the political causes, the political affiliations that big donors have impacts the donations that you receive. I don't doubt that for a minute. I believe that's 100% true. The only thing that I can tell you about that is, here again, I've been around a long, long, long time. Okay. Well, maybe not that long, but long enough, right? And I can tell you that the line between being, let's say, quote unquote, aware of the causes that your donors feel are important, that line between that and selling your soul to big money donors, that line is razor thin. And if your strategy is to pander to the likings of your big money donors, if that's your strategy, You might as well save yourself a lot of time and have a seance, light a bunch of candles, do whatever you need to do, and sell your soul right there. Okay. Because here again, getting back to the right thing, if your goal is to help the homeless, that goal, that purpose will always stand on its own as something that is morally and ethically correct. Political leanings, those winds change. As a matter of fact, they can change as quickly as one election cycle. Okay. So what happens then is when you get involved with catering to the political affiliations of donors, what happens is that everybody that's a nonpartisan leaves. Okay, because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear the lectures. And the minute that you step out of line, as soon as you are beholden to those donors for your existence, the minute you step out of line, they're going to let you know. The minute you vary on any topic that they feel is important, your funding is going to get threatened. And the other thing that is a really bad idea is these donors really, let's say it's an organization that's designed to help the homeless. These donors, these big money donors, really don't get their hands dirty that often. There's some who do, but they don't really go out into the neighborhoods and give up their Saturdays or give up their weekends and spend a lot of time helping people and doing hard work, building things, fixing things, picking up food and donations around the community and driving all around. Those people who are on the front line don't always want to be involved in politics. And now all of a sudden they become targets. They become recognized as people who are championing X, Y, or Z in the political forum, because that's what their donor base wants. That's what they are. That's what the organization is now representing. And consequently, they've become pawns in a political chess game that they never wanted. They wanted to help homeless people. They don't care about politics. A lot of them don't even understand politics. They don't care about politics. It's not even on their radar. And now people are shouting hate things at them. And this has happened to more than one nonprofit over the years, where they have a good cause and they have good people who go out and volunteer for them and work for them, and work for wages, by the way, that don't necessarily sustain an extravagant lifestyle, to say the least. And now all of a sudden they're being shouted at things. They have people sticking signs in their face when all they wanted to do is help the homeless. That's the position you are putting people in who work on the front lines of making the world a better place. So yeah, and let me tell you, I'm not quite done with this yet. When I hear somebody say, "We have an obligation to change society. We have to get involved in these things, and our movement, we must prevail for the betterment of our society." That is really, when you start to examine that is very arrogant. And that arrogance comes off in your marketing. When you say to people, we have to take up this cause because those people over there are the enemy and we have to fight for you. And this cause has to go through and it has to succeed because society needs it. And when you attach politics, when you interweave politics into that cause, it comes off as very arrogant. Very arrogant. The idea that you know best, and it needs to be brought into that nonprofit. It needs to be brought into that business. And by the way, what I was saying about being beholden to people who make donations, that's true for a business. When you start to develop a customer base on the basis of this is what you stand for, in this you're either for me or against me climate, the first time you step out of line, the first time you are slightly left of center, they won't buy your product. You're either for me or you are against me. That is the climate. And when you're for me, we have the righteous cause. We have the cause that is going to make our society a better place. So you better be on our side. Very, very arrogant, and it's not a place that I just don't like it. If you are going to put yourself in a bubble, and here again, we can talk about how bad these bubbles are. They're far worse than what they were a few years ago. Okay, I would say even since 2015 through 2016, it's gotten very much worse, and certainly over the last 15 years, starting with what happened in the wake of the Iraq War and all these other things. It's either you're for me or you're against me, and you're in this alternative reality. And nothing can sway you from that point. So I just don't know. Well, I do know, for me anyway. And if you feel differently, that's fine. If you want to go out on that plank, that's fine. But for me, interweaving politics in business, in nonprofits, in any type of marketing plan, I just don't feel that that's a good idea. For me, this is where I would want to go. For me, if I'm in a position where I'm marketing a nonprofit, I'm in a position where I'm building a brand, that brand should stand, just like we were talking about. If you're championing a better society in terms of how we treat each other through diversity and human rights and ending things like homelessness and stuff like that, those things stand on their own. They don't need propped up with politics, and they shouldn't be propped up with politics. A good cause is a good cause. And same goes for a business. Okay, if we have a business and we're building these widgets are the best widgets. They're made with quality. We're an honest company. We care about worker safety. These are all things, and we're honest with the public. We're honest in our advertising. We're honest in our claims that we make about the product. Our advertising isn't deceptive. These are all things that stand on their own. These are all things that everyone can respect. These are all things that speak to your integrity. When you take up a political cause, especially with the polarization that's out there today, and we can argue about how bad it really is. It's far worse than it was years ago. That let's just say that's a fair enough statement. If you can make your brand stand on universal truths of honesty and quality, that's where you need to go with your product. You don't need to take a political stance to cater to donors. You don't need to take a political stance to sell your products. Now, what you do in your private life and what you do, quite frankly, I know sometimes that businesses reach into the private lives of their employees in terms of what they do publicly with protesting and things like that. I don't feel that should happen either. As an individual, your right to free speech and your right to get involved with different movements that you feel are important, whether they're tied into politics or not, is entirely up to you. And I don't believe, sometimes that can be a very gray area, especially if your business is part of being likable. Very famous quote that I heard Johnny Carson say one time, and I'm paraphrasing here, but likability is 90% of the game. When you're in that business, And he was probably one of the most likable people ever. And by the way, he wasn't mean-spirited with his commentary. He wasn't mean-spirited with his humor. Now, naturally, I'm sure as many years as he was on the air, and there's millions of people in the United States, I'm sure he said something that was offensive somewhere down the line. But for the most part, he didn't have a mean-spirited sense of humor towards politicians, and he certainly didn't make fun or ridicule any of his guests. He always treated people with respect, and likability is part of that business. So if you're in a business like that, you just have to make your own judgments. What are you willing to sacrifice in terms of your success to take a political stance? That's a very personal decision, and I respect that. I totally respect that, and I would leave that up to the individual in terms of how they balance those leanings with the people that they work for. That's a very personal relationship as well. And maybe sometimes you need to sit down with your supervisor and have a conversation if it's going to reflect on the company in some way. But that type of thing aside, as a general rule, if I am managing my personal view here, if I am managing a marketing plan, and I am managing the customers we are going after, or I am managing how we solicit donations and support in the community, my own personal view is you stay as far away from this BS. And that's what it is now. It is BS. You stay as far away from it as possible. Okay. Because it's in the long run, whatever you gain, whatever you feel you gain on paper comes with a risk down the road. Now, that's my personal opinion on this subject. If you would like to tweet me, you can certainly do so. You can tweet me at Billy Dees on Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, I am going to get more involved now with Twitter Spaces. So I'll be tweeting out information about things I'm doing with the podcast, as well as Twitter Spaces. You can find me other places on social media, and the screen name is always the same, Billy Dees, on any number of social media platforms. All right, that's going to do it for this week. I got to tell you, coming up, we got some really, really good interviews. I have some humorists coming up. We're going to talk to a couple of humor authors and humor writers. And I have somebody lined up that's got a little bit of a, getting back to politics, got a little bit of an edge, and it's got some views about what's going on. And if that one pans out, that one is still in the formation stages. The human writers are going to be coming up soon, but we have a lot of guests coming up. A lot of them are very intriguing. That's really what I wanted to get at. And some of them are certainly capable of sparking some conversations for you, giving you fodder for your next conversation around the water cooler. That is for sure. Hey, I am Billy Dees. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I'll be talking to you again real soon. Thank you very much.